any conflict over Taiwan as a long-standing base for bombers, submarines, and warships. China's Air Force released this video showing nuclear-capable bombers unleashing a simulated attack on what looks like Guam's Anderson Air Base.
Guam is simultaneously being increased as a key node in US military operations in Asia, but it's also increasingly at risk from Chinese missile forces. The United States is looking to distribute its operating locations for air activity, including bomber activity, more broadly across the Indo-Pacific.
The US no longer permanently stations its lethal fleet of bombers in Guam. Instead, the Americans want the aircraft to be operationally unpredictable. In other words, harder for the enemy to find and attack.
Guam has a huge target on its back. So Guam might not be the hub of operations that it once was, because at present, due to some of China's missile capabilities, it is quite threatened.
America has to take out an insurance policy because a lot of its forward military bases in places like the island of Guam near Japan and elsewhere in the region are coming much closer to Chinese military strike capabilities. In conventional warfare terms, North Australia is beyond that range for China at present. The north of Australia in the new geopolitical environment has suddenly become strategically much more important, if not crucial, to the United States as well as ourselves.
Northern Australia is now critical to the United States strategy in the Pacific. Part of that strategy was outlined by US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin last year.
I'm proud of the breadth and the depth of our alliance, and it's only getting stronger. And today, we endorsed major force posture initiatives that will expand our access and presence in Australia. We agreed to take immediate steps to improve interoperability through deeper integration.
Three and a half hours drive south of Darwin is a facility that's increasingly significant to the US-Australia alliance. We're on our way to Tyndall Air Base, where a $1.6 billion upgrade is underway.
RAAF Tyndall is fast becoming one of the most important operational air bases in Northern Australia, one from which both Australia and the United States will undertake high-end military operations in the Indo-Pacific.
Ever since the upgrade was announced, there's been speculation about what role Tyndall would play for the US and if it would host America's most strategically important bombers.
I don't go into those sorts of issues at press conferences like this, but what I can say is that we're equipping these facilities to be able to have the maximum advantage of the relationships we have with our alliance partners.
We now know preparations are well underway for the US to deploy up to 6 B-52 bombers to the Northern Territory. These plans to house nuclear-capable aircraft in the top end have not been announced and were only uncovered by Four Corners in US tender documents. The documents show the US Defense Department is planning to build an aircraft parking apron to accommodate 6 B-52s at Tyndall. In addition, there are detailed designs for the construction of a United States Air Force Squadron Operations Facility and Maintenance Center at the base. These are to support deployed B-52 squadrons for training missions during the Northern Territory dry season. The US Air Force is also building its own fuel storage tanks and a bunker for ammunition. The US military has confirmed the construction program and told Four Corners,
"The ability to deploy United States Air Force bombers to Australia sends a strong message to adversaries about our ability to project lethal air power."
Having B-52s located in the Indo-Pacific could be a very strong deterrent signal. B-52s happen to be nuclear-capable bombers, and therefore they have a larger strategic significance. So having those positioned in Australia, not necessarily saying that they would be outfitted with nuclear capability, but having the ambiguity as to whether they could or would have that on could be a very strong deterrent signal.
It's a great expansion of Australian commitment to the United States war plan with China. It's a sign to the Chinese that we are willing to be the tip of the spear, to provide a base not just for US Marine, but most importantly for their long-range power projection of heavy bombers. It's very hard to think of a more open commitment that we could make, a more open signal to the Chinese that we're going along with American planning for a war with China.
to support the bombers and other military aircraft, the US is planning to spend around $1 billion in Northern Australia. This includes 11 giant jet fuel storage tanks in Darwin.
Having fuel would enable the United States to conduct operations from Australia, which happens to be much longer range, and having that already there means that therefore Australia can become a refueling hub for US aircraft, which would reduce their need to go back to the continental United States or to other bases in the region that might be closer in range for potential Chinese attacks.
If war breaks out, it will be total war. Don't think by providing air bases in the northern part of Australia, it will be saving Australia.
Victor Gao is one of the few Chinese insiders allowed to speak to the foreign media.
You need to be fully aware what China is all about. China is a force, not to be bullied. If anyone threatens China with force, they will be dealt with by force in return.
So what could closer cooperation with the United States mean for Australia? In a separate war game, military analyst Monica Wasser and her team explored the risks Australia could face by joining the US in a fight over Taiwan.
In a potential conflict with China over Taiwan, there is a chance that Australia could become a target, particularly if Australia were to join the fight directly or were to provide additional overflight and access rights to US forces undertaking strikes against Chinese forces.
In this war game, US aircraft fly from Australian bases to attack the Chinese. That immediately puts a bullseye on Darwin and RAF Tyndall, with China launching long-range missiles towards the military targets in Northern Australia. The aim is to destroy runways and fuel tanks.
Ultimately, these attacks were not successful because of the long range required, and because China had already expended its most capable long-range and advanced missiles already earlier in the game. But who's to say that in the future, China might have more advanced missile capability that would be better suited to potentially attacking Australia, or whether their attacks would be successful?
We're travelling to one of the most secretive military sites in Australia. It will be instrumental for the US in any conflict with China. Around 28 kilometres outside Alice Springs lies the spy base Pine Gap, and we've been told it's expanding. Jointly run by the US and Australian intelligence agencies, operations here have always been tightly guarded. Under these golf ball-like domes sit powerful antennas, eavesdropping on foreign satellites and detecting missile launches.
It is a hugely potent capability. Outside of America, it is the most potent intelligence collection facility that America has anywhere.
We say no to Pine Gap.
Pine Gap has long been the focus of protests over US bases in Australia.
All of these women are here because they believe that Pine Gap is a first-strike nuclear target.
Pine Gap, whether it's Chinese or Russian facilities, can count in exquisite detail the silos, the ballistic missiles that both Russia and China have.
Paul Dibb is a former head of Defence Intelligence and held a high-level security clearance at Pine Gap for 30 years.
Do I believe that Pine Gap would be a target of China in the event of a serious military crisis? If it looked as though that crisis was going nuclear, China may want to take out Pine Gap as being the ears and eyes of America's capability to know precisely what nuclear capabilities and where not the Chinese have. And the Russians, in any case, including the Soviet Union, in my experience, for the last 40 years, have had Pine Gap as a very significant nuclear target.
All Central Australian natives that grow here. It's very peaceful. It's a great haven.
Kieran Finane is a long-term resident of Alice Springs. Her latest book is about Pine Gap.
We definitely know from around town that there is a big infrastructure expansion there, and I've had that confirmed by authorities. It was described as something like a midlife upgrade for the old girl.
So this is all land for you.
Yeah. The fact that it's out of sight, out of mind, really does help keep it out of most people's consciousness most of the time. And so any of the questions that might arise around it don't have to be dealt with. I'd lived here for almost 3 decades before I took myself on one of their treks to a vantage point where you could see it in the landscape. They're quite rugged hills in reasonably remote locations that you need to climb to be able to see it in the landscape and to get a sense of its very real presence here and what it means for us.
This is about as close as we can get to Pine Gap.
I mean, we could push along a little further perhaps, but I think, not much further before we could come to the boundary.
And what would happen to us if we went on?
Well, you're facing potentially 7 years in jail.
Kieran Finane wants more people to know what goes on at this joint American-Australian base.
Do you think that people understand what this place is used for?
It's called a spy base. I always use the term military base though, because what we've become aware of is that the surveillance is fed directly to military operations. It is a military base.
There are changes happening all over Pine Gap all the time. This is one of the big ones as right now.
Melbourne academic and peace activist Richard Tanter has devoted his career to uncovering the secrets of the spy base.
This is 2022. This is June 22, July 22, August, I think the 8th of August. This is October. This is now.
He's documented the replacement and upgrading of a crucial antenna used to listen in on Russian and Chinese satellites.
You could see the old antenna being uncovered and removed here, the new antenna put in place here, the covering replaced. So over that 3.5, 4 months period, virtually in real time, we can see that a very important part of Pine Gap's function, particularly apropos China, is expanding. China has certainly now, in the last 5 years, particularly in the last 3 years, undoubtedly become the main focus of the monthly and weekly tasking schedules for the Pine Gap, for the satellites attached to Pine Gap. China, I think, not only now is the main focus, I'm quite sure that the electronic order of battle, the searching for Chinese missile sites, the searching for Chinese command sites in a preparatory way is absolutely on high priority at Pine Gap now. But after 2015,
and he's uncovered evidence that Pine Gap is growing.
this is a graph of antennas at Pine Gap over a 50-year period. This is a crude measure of the growth in size and in capability of Pine Gap. When we did our major study of antennas in 2015, we counted 33 antennas there. In the most recent survey we're about to publish, we have counted 45. So that's a big jump in 7 years. And not only is there an increase in the number of antennas, but the type of antennas have changed, the capabilities of those antennas and the systems associated with them. This indicates the extraordinary importance and the increasing importance to the United States at a time of potential war with China. Hosting probably the most important American intelligence base in the world is a signal to China that Australia is utterly committed to the American version of relations with China, which are not good for the Chinese, especially because it carries with it a role in existential nuclear threat to China. You're not going to forget that.
If Australia wants to forfeit all its economic interests with China and always embrace the United States in the hostilities against China, then I'm afraid Australia will be dealt with in the same vein as China will deal with the United States if war breaks out between these two countries.
In Australia's tropical north, any threat posed by China seems a world away. Many here are embracing the benefits from Australia's closer relations with the US. In Darwin, business is booming. The military is pumping billions of dollars into the economy.
It's always been a big booster of our economy. Darwin is a coastal town. Darwin has been a coastal town. So there's a lot of money rolling into the economy.
Just last month, air forces from 17 countries held exercises across northern Australia, showing off their air power. They staged a flyover of Darwin in a very public show of working together.
People just stormed out Middle Beach to have a look at the different airplanes because there were a variety of airplanes from different nations, from Germany, from Japan, from Indonesia, from America. People loved it, simply loved it. That shows you a lot about the support that this kind of exercise they've got in Darwin and how people support the defence forces here in Darwin. Not only in Darwin, but in Katherine and everywhere else in the territory.
Give us the run through what we've got here. If it's USS, it's American.
Yep.
Here's George Phillips, American. Preble, American.
PLA Navy, which is the Chinese Navy. Here's Denver. Got a Thai. We've got Indonesian. So you've got every different country that comes to Darwin, comes in and say hello, here's a hat. But that shows you exactly where Darwin sits and what it means for the defence of Australia.
How do you feel about the broader defence build-up going on across the Northern Territory?
What I see here, it makes me feel more comfortable. I don't feel abandoned. I don't feel being left out without any support. I know if something goes wrong, at least somebody will be here to defend our country.
Every year before they head home, the US Marines take on local rugby team, the Darwin Stray Cats.
It's a little bit about rugby, and it's a lot about all of you and how much we appreciate this partnership and you welcoming us to Darwin every single year. Thank you. Okay, so we're covering the ball. All right, we're ready to go.
The Marines are still learning the rules of the game.
Will's going to come in here and try to blow this up. Get low and use the body of the ball carrier. Come back over, and you're not going to move from that position, all right? Marines go on 3. 1, 2, 3, 3, 1.
What we do is inherently challenging, but it's a lot easier when you have Australian military personnel by your side helping you solve the problem. And I've never received a warmer welcome that I have here in the Northern Territory. So we really do feel like we're part of the family here. The ground truth is I don't actually understand rugby, but I think that was good.
We will see much greater numbers of US military personnel forward located in Australia. That will include personnel from all 3 services, Navy, Air Force, and Army, as well as the Marines in Darwin, which are likely to be expanded.
So this is just really the start.
This is the start.
Australia is now a much larger target. This has prompted an urgent review of our defence capabilities.
And I hope, by the way, in this new Defence Strategic Review, we will be more serious about projecting serious long-range missile strike capability. We need many more long-range conventional strike weapons. Anti-ship missiles, air-to-air missiles, and air-to-ground missiles. We can develop that capability, which exists already, and we have some of them, but in very small amounts. But I'm saying now, time is of the urgency. This is not a theoretical potential threat.
As the drums of war beat louder, Australia is in lockstep with the United States in a dangerous and unstable region.
I don't think that war is inevitable, but the United States and its allies and partners have to take the threat seriously enough to make significant changes to deter China. What we currently have in place, militarily and economically, is not enough to convince Xi Jinping that it's not worth it.
Do I think the current environment is the most dangerous I've seen in my lifetime? That is a big question. I've had a long lifetime. The Cold War was very dangerous, and it wasn't just the Cuban Missile Crisis. The 1983 crisis in Europe was much more dangerous. But that was the other side of the world. In terms of this part of the world, this is the most dangerous situation I've experienced.
If Australia wants to go into a war which may lead to Armageddon, you think about the consequence. I really do not want to express that consequence in front of your audience.
decades of peace, Japan is confronting the possibility of war. With the resurgent Russia, North Korea, and crucially, a more powerful China on its doorstep, Japan is putting on a show of force.
We have to start getting ready. We don't really know how much time we have.
Japan's embarking on its biggest military expansion since the Second World War, and it's fortifying a new front line on its islands near Taiwan. But some locals fear these new military bases will turn their islands into a war zone.
Whoever creates or cooks up the war are the ones that I really hate.
More than 70 years since Japan renounced war, the country is again preparing for conflict. The aim is to prevent China from going to war by showing Japan and its allies will put up a fight. But is this deterrence going to work? Or will it help create the conflict Japan is trying to avoid? It's the morning rush at this military base in southern Japan. Hello. Anything? The base is home to a specialised team of soldiers called the Amphibious Rapid Deployment Brigade, or ARDB. The brigade is like the US Marines, trained to launch assaults from the sea. This morning, the endurance of these new recruits is being tested in the pool. Nearby, 33-year-old Captain Shogo Iwai is training with his unit. He joined the self-defense forces when he was only 15.
母親については反対をしました。高校生ではやっぱり一番遊べる時期っていうところでしっかりと遊んでから、自衛官になりなさいっていうことが言って、でその反対を仕切って入りました。
These drills simulate jumping from a helicopter. In a real war, Captain Iwai and his team could be sent in as a covert reconnaissance unit ahead of a full-scale beach landing. Some, jumping out for the first time, are nervous.
やはり気が、いる中で、10日になりますので、速やかに、制圧をしない、仲間の命、またヘリの、安全も関わっているので、そういうのを考えて飛びなさいというふうに言ってます。思い切りいくことですね。
This brigade was created 5 years ago after hostile confrontations with Beijing over disputed islands in the East China Sea. Major Shingo Nashinoki is the unit's commander. Hi, Nashinoki. Hi, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Hi. Just having a look at your previous assault vehicles.
我が国を取り巻く安全保障環境というのは非常に厳しいものがありますし、今後ますます厳しくなってくるものと思います。我が国の特性というものは多くの島々を抱えているということになります。その島を確実に守りきる。
非常にどこに敵、障害、被害、そういったものがあるか分かりませんので、非常に危険で、怖いから怖いですね。
So why did you pick this specific job?
もう、自分の愛する日本を守るためです。
A 15-minute drive away is America's Sasebo Naval Base, a crucial supply point for US ships in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. It's one of 13 American military bases on Japanese soil. Every morning, naval officers here salute the US-Japan alliance.
Ready, two, right, base, forward, mark.
Since the end of the Second World War, American military bases like this have been the backbone of Japan's defense. They give the US a vital launching point for military operations, helping ensure its position as Asia's dominant superpower. But a rising China is challenging American dominance. In global terms, the US military is more powerful than China's. But China's defense forces have grown rapidly in the region, and it's provoking intense debate in Japan.
Suddenly, we are waking up to the potential threat that China is posing. And in order to face that, we're very poorly prepared. And what's more worrying is that the Americans are very poorly prepared in this region.
我々の安全保障環境が非常に厳しいという中の一つにこの台湾海峡問題などが当然入ってきます。
If the US gets involved in Taiwan, and then if Japan also provides even real area support, then China would start to retaliate, probably against the US bases based in Japan at the very least.
If there is a military conflict in the Taiwan Strait, I consider it very unlikely that we can stay out of it.
Why?
Because some of our islands are very close to Taiwan. We are in the front line. Really, I think everybody feels that.
I'm heading to the southwest to see Japan's new front line up close. 2,000 kilometres from Tokyo and under 300 kilometres from Taiwan is the island of Ishigaki. It's part of the Okinawan region. Ishigaki is a popular tourist destination and home to fishermen and fruit growers like Ryutaro Kinjo.
まだ豊かな自然が残ってて、この住む人たちにもほのぼのとできるし。
Every morning, Ryutaro takes the short trip to his family fruit farm.
おはようございます。
He almost had a very different life. 9 years ago, he was working in corporate America.
向こうでサラリーマン働いてみて、やっぱなんか違うかな、戻ってくることにしました。
Tetsuhiro Kinjo hopes his son will one day take over the family farm.
後継者ができるってことで、本当に安心しています。
But Ryutaro fears this idyllic lifestyle is under threat. To show me why, he takes me for a drive. Less than a kilometre away, sticking out from the surrounding hills, is a huge construction site. So, what are we looking at?
That would be a military base.
How did you first find out about this base?
When I see the newspaper.
So quite a surprise.
Yeah, much fun.
When the base is finished, it'll be home to around 600 soldiers, stockpiles of ammunition and missiles. It's created a lot of tension and division in this community.
その住民同士の仲が悪くなったり、関係が崩れたりっていうその状況を見るのが本当に一番辛いです。
Has this base divided the community?
I think.
To understand Ishigaki's strategic importance to Japan, you have to see how it fits into the bigger picture. It's part of a long chain of islands in the southwest where Japan's been building military bases in recent years. Yamaguni, Ishigaki, Miyako, Amami Oshima, and Nagashima.
These dotted islands are kind of like fences that hold in the Chinese, and that's exactly because of that they don't really like it, and they will definitely not like us moving damage assets down there. That's the whole point of it.
The Okinawan Islands have been wedged between major military powers before. This history has left an indelible mark.
On Okinawa, we trapped and destroyed over 100,000 of their best troops.
In the dying days of the War in the Pacific, the Japanese Imperial Army was putting up a final stand in the Okinawan Islands.
We're going to destroy Japan's army, Japan's navy, Japan's whole power to wage war.
On Ishigaki, the Imperial Army thought a US invasion was imminent. Fearing the locals might give up information to the Americans, the Japanese army forced them to move into the jungle.
Some more carrying things on the shoulder. Women mostly on their heads and on their back, carrying babies on back and so forth.
Setsuko Yamazato was only 7 when her family was brought here. How does it feel to be standing here?
I don't even want to come here and think back on those days. It brings all that memory back to me.
Setsuko is too frail to go any further, but her friend, historian Norikazu Ishido, takes me deeper into the jungle.
軍の命令で強制的にやむを得ずマラリア有病地と分かっていながらここに避難させられたんですね。でそこでこれもう食料がない。でこれはカマと後ですけどもかろうじてトカゲとかシマルクハコガメ爬虫類とかねそういうものを食べてどうにか生活していたんですがもう栄養失調になって体はどんどん衰えてマラリア病になってそして寒さでガタガタ震えて高熱にうなされて本当に無念の死を遂げていった多くの人々が亡くなっていきました。
My mother, she and I caught malaria on the same night. We were just hugging each other, lying down, trembling, shaking like something. We couldn't stop the fever and so forth. It continued. Then it went on like this, like that until May 17th, so when she died.
Malaria killed around 2,500 Ishigaki locals.
I feel those who died of malaria and things, they were all sacrificed by Japanese military.
Setsuko's baby sister also died of starvation.
I think I didn't know what death meant. It took me a while before I really got lonely, losing my sister, mother, and so forth. So at that time I didn't feel anything. I want this not to happen again. Never, never, never again.
It's a mission statement Setsuko has lived by.
No mental base. Put off.
veteran activist runs the so-called Society of Grannies to protect life and livelihood.
If you have a missile base, that would be the first object that enemies would aim for.
Every Sunday, Setsuko and her friends rally against the new military base. They chant in the Okinawan dialect. You've been fighting for many years. Are you getting tired from fighting?
Tiring? Never. It looks to me it's become one of my hobbies. I never get tired from fighting.
But the grannies are up against powerful forces. Nakayama-san, James Ocean. Ishigaki's mayor, Yoshitaka Nakayama, is officially an independent, but was endorsed by the country's ruling party, the LDP. He's an ardent supporter of the base. In last year's elections, the mayor campaigned on a pro-base platform and had a convincing win against his anti-base rival. This is your fourth term as mayor?
私は今市長になって13年目ですけども、選挙4回やっています。4回やってる選挙の時、毎回自衛隊の配備については選挙の争点になっていました。石垣にもし駐屯地、自衛隊がなかった場合は、空白地域ですから、中国から一番攻めやすい場所になると思いますので、そういう意味を考えても、やはり石垣には自衛隊の駐屯は
Hydropower's clean, renewable energy will steady our planet's rising temperature. Without it, there's only...
The United States Navy helped secure victory in 2 world wars and the Cold War. Today, the Navy remains a formidable fighting force, but even officers within the service have questioned its readiness. While the U.S. spent 20 years fighting land wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Pentagon watched China, its greatest geopolitical rival of the 21st century, build the largest Navy in the world. China has threatened to use that Navy to invade Taiwan, an important American ally. As tensions with China continue to rise, we wanted to know more about the current state of the U.S. Navy and how it's trying to deter China while preparing for the possibility of war.
The story will continue in a moment.
The Navy's always on alert. 1/3 of the Navy is always deployed and operating at all times. The Navy's mustering right now about 300 ships, and there are about 100 ships at sea right now all around the globe.
Admiral Samuel Picaro commands the U.S. Pacific Fleet, whose 200 ships and 150,000 sailors and civilians make up 60% of the entire U.S. Navy. We met him last month on the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz, deployed near the U.S. territory of Guam, southeast of Taiwan, and the People's Republic of China, or PRC.
You've been operating as a naval officer for 40 years. How has operating in the Western Pacific changed?
In the early 2000s, the PRC Navy mustered about 37.
Tonight, the dramatic turn in the criminal case against Hunter Biden as his plea deal is derailed. The president signed out in the federal court in Delaware where he was expected to plead guilty to tax crimes, but the judge refusing to accept the terms of his deal with prosecutors. His attorney at one point threatening to rip up the agreement. The drama coming as Republicans ramp up their investigations into Hunter Biden. Can the deal be saved? Also tonight, scary moments for Mitch McConnell. Months after suffering a concussion, the senator appearing to freeze on camera during a news conference, then led away, returning moments later what his team says happened. In New York, the crane 45 stories high collapsing in flames, hitting another building and crashing to the ground. The terror as bystanders run for cover. The extreme heat now stretching coast to coast, 125 million alert from California to Maine. News tonight on that Ohio officer who unleashed a police dog and a surrendering man now out of a job. The apparent coup attempt in Niger, plus our NBC News exclusive. How the climate change crisis is fueling unrest in West Africa.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening and welcome. Tonight, a courtroom surprise for President Biden's son Hunter, who was widely expected to walk out of a court today with most of his legal troubles behind him. Instead, the younger Biden saw his plea arrangement with the government over tax charges crumble when the judge challenged some of the terms of the deal, including a constitutional question, telling the two sides she cannot accept or reject the plea agreement. The upshot, instead of pleading guilty to failing to pay his taxes for 2 years, as the arrangement called for, Hunter Biden pled not guilty to the charges. The two sides ordered to provide the court with more information. Hunter Biden has been a frequent target of President Biden's political adversaries, with many calling the Hunter plea agreement a sweetheart deal. Ryan Nobles has details.
Hunter Biden entered a federal courthouse today hoping to bring to an end his legal problems. It did not turn out that way. Tonight, in a stunning move, a federal judge refusing to sign off on his controversial plea deal. Judge Mary Ellen Noriega, a Trump appointee, saying the agreement contained atypical provisions and she needed more information. Telling the lawyers, quote, "I am not in a position to accept or reject this plea agreement, so I'm going to defer it." At one point, as the deal was unraveling, Biden's attorney declaring, quote, "We'll rip it up," while prosecutors revealing their investigation into Hunter Biden is ongoing. The deal would only absolve Hunter of legal issues between 2014 and
The war in Ukraine is...
Driving safely is all about the little things, like giving folks a break, even at unmarked crosswalks.
The war in Ukraine is still raging, and despite Putin's repeated failure to secure enough military manpower with actual training and experience to make any lasting headway on the battlefields, or simply stop embarrassing himself by losing dozens of tanks every week, Russia doesn't seem to be backing off anytime soon. How will the Russo-Ukraine conflict progress? Will it involve Russia's inevitable attack on members of NATO? And if the bear ever decides to strike again, is NATO ready to respond? Let's find out. This is Belgium, famous for its fluffy waffles, artisan chocolate, and for being home to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, aka NATO. While NATO's headquarters are based in Brussels, the capital of Belgium, its powerful member countries span over continents and include some of the world's most powerful militaries, including the UK, France, Spain, Germany, Turkey, and of course, the US. Impressive, right? But while NATO is composed of as many as 31 member countries with access to combined military forces of approximately 3.6 million, active duty personnel, the US military is still one of the largest in the world, with over 1.3 million active duty personnel and more than 800,000 reserve personnel. Let's just say it's a good thing that NATO and the US are in the frat house. Since its very inception in 1949, NATO has reckoned with the possibility of having to fend off a Russian attack. The hows and the whys of that particular scenario were always in flux, but the threat remained the same. Thanks in part to its Ukrainian miscalculation, today Russia, on paper at least, no longer presents the same threat as it once did. According to a very recent report from the Institute for the Study of War, Russian forces in Ukraine are operating in decentralized and largely degraded formations throughout the theater, and the current pattern of deployment suggests that most available units are already online and engaged in either offensive or defensive operations. That leaves virtually no troops left over to attack elsewhere, and that's good news for NATO. But because of its undeniable history of aggressive behavior under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, states underestimate Russia at their own peril. Well, NATO certainly isn't making that mistake. Russia remains its primary geopolitical adversary, and you can be sure it is poised and ready for whatever Russia can throw at it. What exactly does NATO deploy to defend its borders? NATO has had a credible military presence on Europe's eastern flank for nearly a decade now, and since 2022, it has only grown stronger. In the aftermath of the Cold War, the Baltic states eagerly submitted their application for NATO membership, having agreed to undertake the required political and military reforms. On March 29, 2004, the trio of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia successfully joined the world's most powerful military bloc. Since then, these small states, along with Finland, who just this year became the alliance's newest member, have become arguably the most important actors in a hypothetical war against Russia. It is them, after all, who share long, difficult-to-patrol borders with their eastern neighbor, and it is them who will be NATO's first line of defense in a hypothetical war scenario with Russia. Unlike Finland, who immediately brought a robust reserve of 280,000 soldiers, 650 tanks, including 200 German-manufactured Leopards, and what many consider Western Europe's strongest artillery to NATO upon joining, the Baltics had to fight an uphill battle to bring their relatively humble forces up to snuff. When we say humble, here's what we mean. Estonia possesses 1,976 armored fighting vehicles. Latvia has 2,930, and Lithuania has 5,456 armored fighting vehicles, and none of these countries have any tanks. Finland also has a larger active military personnel count compared to Lithuania's 17,000, Latvia's 6,000, and Estonia's 5,000. In short, Finland is pretty hardcore when it comes to military power in Europe, and we're guessing everybody was really glad it decided to join NATO, especially the Baltic countries. As one retired US military officer noted, upon joining the alliance, the Baltic states were at 1 on a 1 to 10 scale of military capabilities. They needed arms, they needed ammunition, they needed vehicles, and they needed training, and they needed it all fast. This, their Western allies agreed to provide them with the aim of making them interoperable with Western-style thinking and doctrine. The Baltic states reciprocated, having proved their loyalty by deploying forces on UN missions and making a not insignificant contribution to NATO operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. You may not realize, for instance, that it was Estonia that agreed to fight alongside Western allies in the Middle East without any national caveats, and for its efforts suffered one of the highest ratios of deaths per capita of any of the Allied countries, having
They will soon be in Ukraine. The Belarusians heat up their tank engines. Apart from this one, although it may look threatening, it's actually reserved for tourists like us. In Belarus, journalists are not welcome. So to avoid being spotted, we pretended to be tourists to understand why this country has become a strategic ally of Russia. The nostalgia of the former USSR can be seen throughout the country, particularly the Stalin Line, a bit like the Maginot Line from the Second World War of the Soviet Empire.
Yes, because 20 soldiers was close. Apart from 10 days, they can leave, they can shoot from them. Please, come inside.
In order not to arouse suspicion, we filmed with our phones and small, inconspicuous cameras. However, if our guide doubts us even slightly, he is obliged to denounce us.
This munition can shoot.
Yes, very heavy.
Yes, tank speed 12 shoes per minute.
And it was like this?
Look, when you if your fingers up.
Outside, we witness a shooting session with live ammunition this time. Today, some extras are also rehearsing a battle. The image sends shivers down our spine, as at the same time, the sound of marching resounds from the border which separates Belarus and Ukraine. Over there, it's no longer a mere rehearsal. President Lukashenko and Vladimir Putin have reached a decision. In 3 days, the 30,000 men of the Russian army stationed in Belarus will invade Ukraine.
Человека, когда нет, смотрите, когда они красиво будут его держать, вот, а я могу сфотографировать их на их фотоаппарате.
We have infiltrated one of the most secret and isolated countries in the world at the worst time. We began rather relaxed, but our smiles from those first days quickly gave way to anxiety. Our trip did not go as planned. Belarus is very often labeled as the last dictatorship in Europe. Its president, the almighty Alexander Lukashenko, is determined to defy the world. In his country, international law does not exist. To arrest an opponent, he hijacks an airliner. Europe imposes sanctions on him. He punishes them by sending hundreds of thousands of refugees to its borders.
Réflexe un peu de cours de récréation, eh bien, ils m'ont fait des ennuis, je vais leur faire des ennuis.
Demonstrators demand his resignation. Lukashenko orders his police to shoot them. And why is he not afraid of anyone? Because he has pledged his allegiance to the Russian Goliath. Vladimir Putin protects him. Ally and accomplice, the two men use the same methods. Today, like North Korea, this totalitarian state is completely close to the Western world. However, we managed to spend almost 2 weeks here, pretending to be tourists, in which we were able to meet his opponents who live on the edge.
Я оставила машину на парковке, вернулась, а кнопочка была вот так. Я так никогда не делала. Соответственно, здесь все предельно ясно.
The permanent surveillance which oppresses the Belarusian youth and forces them to live in fear.
Okay, no problem. Not quality talk. I don't know whether or not you're a fucking agent or something like that, you know?
Many flee the country to avoid prison.
Yesterday I received a letter with a threatening to be killed and to be cut off from my head.
Even 4-year-old children are not safe from the barbarity of the KGB, the Belarusian secret police.
They sent to every kindergarten video and ask director just to, if they find this their kid, just call.
At a time when Vladimir Putin is doing everything in his power to get his hands on Ukraine, we will explore a world that we thought had disappeared. A frightening taste of what could await Ukraine in case of defeat.
Bonjour monsieur. Je vous en prie. Merci.
For 1 year, Europe has forbidden all planes to land in Belarus. So the first stop of our trip is Istanbul. But why such a sanction? Well, President Alexander Lukashenko has hijacked a plane before, a case worthy of James Bond. In May 2021, he sent a jet fighter to intercept a Ryanair plane passing over Belarus. He hijacks it and forces it to land in Minsk. The official reason, there's a bomb on board. Once the plane landed, instead of the police searching for explosives, they arrest a passenger. The journalist Roman Protasevich, an opponent of the regime who had taken refuge abroad. After his arrest, as if by chance, on national television, he confesses to being a dangerous agitator.
И продолжаю сдерживать сотрудниками МВД национальной наркотики. Сейчас я нахожусь в сезон номер 1 города Минска. Даю признательные показания по факту организации массовых беспорядков в Грузии.
Lukashenko acts outside of international law. We are warned even before arriving in Belarus. We land in Minsk at the end of the day. The post-Soviet capital of 2 million inhabitants has all the qualities of a modern city. In order to remain as secret as possible, we book a guest room. Since the Ryanair affair, friendly greetings to Europeans are rare. The owner is very surprised to see French people.
Perfect. Very beautiful. There is a lot of tourists in Minsk these days.
Now it's not working because it's very difficult to come here. And I need your passport because my registration.
You need a picture?
Yes.
No problem.
As in any police state, the owner is obliged to pass on our passports so that they can be checked.
Do you have internet here? Yes, I do.
Is there a limitation of No. Like in France?
We are surprised. The internet is free, but it's impossible to know if the network is monitored. We are wary of it. The next morning, we leave to explore Minsk. The best way to evaluate the purchasing power of a Belarusian is to go shopping. Even if the cost of living is almost 3 times lower than in France, most people avoid entering supermarkets like this one. In the capital, the average salary does not exceed 450 euros, and in the countryside, it's limited to 200 euros. The supermarket has been designed for the upper middle classes, like those who work in the country's growth sectors, farms, oil refineries, and fertilizers. But there is a question on our minds. As a foreign tourist, can we walk in the streets of the capital without being followed by a plainclothes policeman, as in the times of the former USSR? We made an appointment with a local guide. In order to pass unnoticed, we will film everything with our phones like real tourists.
So this is really old people, like old lady, but looking like young women. But of course, the answer why it looks so modern, that it was devastated till ashes so many times and burned 17 times.
There are still some grand Orthodox churches, and especially vestiges of its Soviet past. As with this monument erected to the glory of the comrades, or this one dedicated to the soldiers of the Red Army fallen on the battlefield at the time of the sickle and hammer.
Here to memorize, to commemorate our guys who were participants of Afghanistan war. We came to Afghanistan from the side of Soviet Union, and actually it was in 1979.
While walking, we look discreetly around us. But in our 2-hour visit, there is no sign of surveillance or forced order. We only see one soldier and one police car. We tell the guide about our realization, but her answer quickly brings us back to reality.
You not see like lots of people, lots of soldiers, but they are everywhere. I mean, it's normal just to come there, but it's so peaceful in the city because there were years when they took people and now people just don't make any troubles in this center because they don't be trouble. And you were imagining cops everywhere and stuff. But you will not see. But they're here.
For our guide, it's a good marketing strategy. Belarus has become the ideal place to spend safe vacations.
For now, Belarus is really safe. I mean, in terms of visiting, if you are a foreigner, if you are a tourist, if you want to come, there are no restrictions, there is nothing, you can go everywhere. Everything looks very normal.
But not completely. The actions of its president, who constantly flouts human rights, doesn't provide much reassurance.
I have 2 reservations for March. People are afraid to come, there are also restrictions to come.
If the political situation changed, maybe the tourists will come back.
Her low register says a lot about the terror that Alexander Lukashenko has on the whole country. So, who is this man that some describe as the last European dictator? Alexander Lukashenko was born in 1954 in what was then the Socialist Republic of Belarus. He grew up in a peasant family, but the man was ambitious. After the army, he quickly climbed the ladder. The party entrusted him with the management of a steak farm and then the reins of a building materials factory. His life changes in 1989. The USSR collapses with the Berlin Wall, but he takes flight. He was elected deputy of the young Belarusian Republic at 37 years old. We meet a man who knew him closely. Anatoly Lebedko was close to the president before becoming a pariah in his eyes. However, he was part of the first circle of friends of the president in the early 90s.
У нас, да, с Александром Лукашенко длинная история. Мы с ним были в парламенте.
In 1991, after the fall of the Socialist Republic, Belarusians discovered what life was like to be without restrictions, a life of freedom with abundant supermarkets. The young deputy Lukashenko discovered his talent for speaking in public.
Разрушился Советский Союз. И людям впервые за долгие годы позволили говорить открыто. Лукашенко, он был далеко не самый популярный и умный депутат, но он был одним из самых активных. Он выступал от микрофона буквально по всем вопросам. И ему еще повезло. Он стал главой группы по борьбе с коррупцией. И это был тот трамплин, который очень сильно способствовал популярности и известности Лукашенко.
A strategy that paid off. In 1994, although he was not the most loved, Alexander Lukashenko became the first Belarusian president. In Belarus, Lukashenko was elected with 80% of the votes. He quickly showed his true colors.
Потом уже узнали, что, оказывается, Лукашенко избивал своих рабочих. Самая большая неожиданность для всех это было то, что Лукашенко болен. Болен на власть. Вот это самый страшный диагноз для политика.
President Lukashenko decided everything by himself.
Лукашенко пошел на уничтожение всего, что называется альтернативой.
In 1996, in order to extend his mandate from 5 to 7 years, Alexander Lukashenko tries to modify the constitution. 89 out of 110 deputies are strongly opposed to it. The sanction is severe. He adjourns the parliament and sends the rebels to detention. Even his old friend,
Needing drums? Start viewing them from day one with Crest Drum Toxicology Store.
even his old friends like Anatoly Lebedko, who dared to rebel, suffer the same fate as the others in a prison that looked like this one.
Очень похожая камера. Например, в моей не было туалета. Вместо него был бачок. И туда нужду можно было вставлять. В камерах вон. И для того, чтобы уменьшить эти запахи, мы просто бросали в этот бачок мандарин.
Anatoly Lebedko drew the horror of his detention cell. Here, the guards who dressed entirely in black and who tried to break him day after day.
Неизвестность – это действительно испытание. С тобой могут делать все, что угодно. Ты как вещь, как собственность. Каждый день тебе выгоняют в подвал, в холодное помещение, раздевают догола, и ты должен стоять 30-40 минут, не двигаясь в таком положении. Конечно, это пытка. Я не получил письма, и когда я получил первое письмо, это было даже скорее маленькая записка, где рукой моего сына было написано: папа, все хорошо. И когда я впервые вернулся к стене, я заплакал.
The president's disgraced friend spent 108 days in prison.
Когда я сидел в тюрьме, нас были десятки, сейчас тысячи. И это ужасно.
Between 1994 and 2020, Alexander Lukashenko was re-elected 6 times, with over 80% of the votes. None of these elections were validated by the international community.
А вот в 2020 году его не стало ни международной легитимности, ни легитимности внутри страны. И поэтому практически все это время он провел в военных казармах, на полигонах, с военными, с генералами. Он понял, что только с их помощью он может
Trench warfare has the reputation of being one of the most tiresome, deadly, and brutal forms of warfare, not only for the body, but also psychologically. In summer, it's sweltering hot. In winter, freezing cold. And in between, you're probably sinking in mud. But still, in Ukraine, trenches are a crucial element for both sides, and storming them is one of the deadliest possible undertakings. So, welcome to Talking Tactics. For this week, it's all about trenches. Before we show you some examples from Ukraine, a bit of history. Although we see armies and troops digging into the ground even before, the birth of the modern trench goes back to the 17th century. The French military engineer by the name of Sébastien de Brest de Vauban, who built them initially as a tool to support troops besieging towns or castles. Troops would dig multiple parallel lines of trenches and connect them to one another so that infantry could move at least relatively safe from incoming enemy fire. Trenches remained merely a part of siegecraft until the improved firepower of weapon systems basically forced both sides, attacking and defending, to make use of trenches, like for example the American Civil War. With the outbreak of World War I in 1914, especially with the stalemate encountered between German, French, British, American, and troops of other nations on the Western Front, began the until today largest and most significant period of trench warfare in history so far. The typical trench system in World War I consisted of multiple lines. Most trenches were dug in a type of zigzag so that no enemy could fire more than a couple of meters down its length. This form also protected soldiers from shrapnel flung about due to grenades or artillery fire. Each of the main lines was connected to another. Apart from moving troops, that's how they transported food, ammunition, orders, etc. The intricate network of trenches contained command posts, first aid stations, kitchens, latrines. Most trenches had machine gun emplacements or other elevated firing positions built into the trench to defend against an assault, as well as dugouts deep enough to shelter a large number of troops during enemy incoming fire. Today in Ukraine, more than 100 years later, trenches still play a vital part for both sides. Why? In general, the reasons are the same as in World War I. A trench provides cover from incoming fire, it hides you and gives you a much more comfortable position in defending. There are, of course, some significant differences. Cluster munition, which is now being delivered to Ukraine. Check out our video by clicking on the link in the description. Modern tanks, armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, and especially drones that provide both reconnaissance and attacking options have given the attacking side many more advantages in trench warfare. How to storm a trench. Since 2014, the war in Ukraine, which remained largely static until the launch of Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022, led to the establishment of a network of trenches that covers much of the front line. When the dynamic of the war slowed down after the liberation of Kherson in the autumn-winter of 2022, especially the Russian side expanded their network of trenches in eastern and southern Ukraine in anticipation of the now undergoing counteroffensive. So if Ukraine wants to advance, there is no other option than storming and capturing this vast network of enemy trenches. Like with most things, there's not only one way to do it. The Russians have the most brutal method, reconnaissance by combat. So they send soldiers ahead, and when they get shot at, the enemy positions are exposed, and they send the next wave, telling them where to go and so on. But if you're not willing to sacrifice that many men, you need to look at other options. If you're lucky, really pummeling and pressuring the enemy by combining heavy weapons like tanks and artillery with fast advancing infantry, you might be able to cause enough panic amongst the enemy soldiers that they will try to flee the safety of their trench. You can see this in an example of the 59th Brigade that was posted on the 9th of July. First, drones drop grenades into the trenches. Then, the men advance in armored vehicles, cutting through the field. Frantically, the first Russians leave the trench and flee. Then the men enter the trench and clear out what's left. Looks almost too easy, right? It's not. If the soldiers entrenched are motivated and have a sufficient supply of food, water, and especially ammunition, getting them to leave out of their own load is almost impossible. That means you have to go in. In our next example, you can see Special Operations Forces of the 73rd Marine Center entering an enemy trench in southern Ukraine. They entered the trench from the rear, surprising its inhabitants. The noise, the tight space, the dust, all this gives you just a small impression of the hell of trench warfare. That's why most Ukrainian brigades, and also most Russian ones, have soldiers labeled Shturmoviki, which translates loosely to stormtroopers, but of course just calling them assault troops is just as accurate. It's the job for the toughest of the toughest, and commands the greatest respect from their fellow soldiers. Shturmoviki are part of storm units, battalions, and sometimes even entire brigades, like the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, who specialize in exactly this, storming trenches. So, for our third example, and also to conclude this episode, we want to show you a video of the 3rd Assault Brigade released this June, showing you from a first-hand perspective the true cost, physically and psychologically, of what it takes to storm an enemy trench. Also, this might serve as an explanation if you're wondering why the Ukrainian counteroffensive is slower than expected. And even if in this example the Ukrainian forces are able to complete their mission successfully, Don't get fooled by the accompanying soundtrack. Even for the winners, the effects of this experience can very well haunt them for years to come. Thanks for watching Talking Tactics. Hit like and subscribe, and see you next week.
A stunning retreat by Russia overlays the on the battlefield of
At St. George Hall, in the Kremlin, in the midst of the crisis,
Are beginning to spark criticism of the Russian leaders.
Russian officials packed the room. They knew the war in Ukraine was going badly.
His actions, quote, detrimental to Russia's and its citizens' future.
Their leader was at a critical juncture.
Президент Российской Федерации Владимир Владимирович Путин.
Vladimir Putin would make it clear what his intentions were and who the enemy really was.
Западные страны веками твердят о том, что они несут другим народам свободу и демократию. Все с точностью да наоборот.
Vladimir Putin needs to somehow justify the horrific sacrifices that Russians are making on his orders by broadening the aperture, making this about something bigger, into some kind of conflict with the United States, the West, NATO, take your pick.
Диктат США строится на грубой силе, на кулачном праве.
I think it's a very dangerous moment. It's a dangerous moment for Ukraine. I think it's a dangerous moment for Russia because it's hard to see what the pathway forward is. It's a dangerous time.
It was a dramatic escalation. Putin leaving no doubt his war was against the United States and the West. It is a war that he has been waging for years, confronting 5 American presidents on a path that has brought Russia and the United States to the brink. It began during the height of the Cold War.
There is such change taking place in the communist world.
We must take actions to assist the campaign for democracy.
During the presidency of Ronald Reagan.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
At the time, Vladimir Putin was a young KGB officer stationed in Germany, trained to fight the United States.
He wasn't a professional politician. He was, in fact, a professional agent for the KGB. So he would have learned about the West in the frame of the adversary, the enemy, or at least certainly all of the reasons in which there would be to be suspicious about the West.
Lieutenant Colonel Putin, the collapse of the Soviet Union, spurred on by an American president, was a defining moment.
It's the thousands now here in the tens of thousands. The feeling is the end of the Cold War.
You can only imagine what it must have been like as a young KGB officer. Your country disappears or is in the process of disappearing. You're there on the front lines. The Communist Party obviously will lose its raison d'etre. And so it must have been devastating. And I think that must have been a severe blow.
As we celebrate Christmas, this day of peace and hope.
The humiliation at the hands of the U.S. continued as the next American president, George H.W. Bush, declared the end of the Soviet era a triumph.
Eastern Europe is free. The Soviet Union itself is no more. This is a victory for democracy and freedom. It's a victory for the moral force of our values.
Vladimir Putin sees American talk of human rights, democracy, freedom as a cynical fig leaf, something that the U.S. uses to cover itself as it cynically pursues its interests across the globe, as it pushes its agenda across the globe.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. In Moscow today, an unprecedented peaceful passage of power.
As he ascended to the presidency, Vladimir Putin was determined to restore Russian strength and empire.
Russians are looking for a strong hand to lead the country. Vladimir Putin, it appears, is their man.
He came to see himself as almost ordained to lead Russia at this moment and to lead Russia back to greatness. If that is your ordained mission, then there aren't a lot of limits on the means you can use to achieve that goal.
President Clinton arrived in Moscow carrying a message of cooperation.
As president, Putin carried his simmering grievance with the United States into his first meeting with President Bill Clinton.
Arriving at the Kremlin for their first presidential encounter, both leaders.
President Clinton wanted to get a little bit of feel to meet him in the Kremlin as president.
Two presidents, one near the end of his term, the other beginning a new
Putin was wary of the American president, who had championed the spread of liberalization and democracy in Russia.
Putin conveys a huge amount through body language. He tries to show you that he is the alpha male in the room through the way he spreads his legs, through the way he slouches a bit in his chair, through the way that he will look at people, kind of give them a dismissive hand wave.
His first meeting with Clinton, he was a cold fish. He had no interest in dealing with Clinton. Clinton felt insulted and rebuffed. Putin didn't want anything to do with Clinton.
If Mr. Clinton was hoping for a foreign policy triumph, he won't get it here.
Later that day, Clinton received a warmer reception from Putin's mentor, former President Boris Yeltsin. And he issued a warning about the new Russian president.
Bill Clinton looked hard into Yeltsin's eyes and said, I'm a little bit concerned about this young man that you have turned over the presidency to. He doesn't have democracy in his heart. And he reached over and poked him in his heart. And I will never forget the expression that came over Yeltsin. I think it really shook Yeltsin a bit.
But in front of the cameras, Clinton walked a careful line, not revealing his concerns about Putin.
If you want to know what my personal assessment is, I think he is fully capable of building a prosperous, strong Russia while preserving freedom and pluralism and the rule of law. It's a big challenge. I think he's fully capable of doing it.
But from the start, Clinton's private fears about Putin were being realized.
From the very beginning, you saw in Putin somebody who didn't have the values of the West. Piece by piece, he is dismantling the structures of democracy, fragile though they were, that had been put in place, and reconsolidating control in the Kremlin. That's not a Westernizer. That's not a Democrat small d. That's an old-fashioned Russian autocrat that we saw and should have seen from the very beginning.
Literally one of the closest elections here in history.
It was the start of a new presidency in the U.S.
George W. Bush, the governor of Texas,
had expressed optimism about being able to get along with Putin.
and the next president of the United States.
I look forward to working with Mr. Putin and explaining my point of view and my attitude about the post-Cold War here. I'm going to look him right in the eye and say, you're no longer the enemy. And we're not your enemy. Surely we can work together. We're a peaceful nation. And we look forward to working together with
Putin saw in President Bush someone that he could do business with. He was seeking a new great power relationship, that President Bush could be a leader who he could work with to redefine the international system.
The Putin's early moves, consolidating power, and his past as a KGB agent didn't deter the Bush team.
It didn't bother me that Putin was KGB. In the KGB, we were taught to think for yourself. So actually, that struck us as an opportunity. I don't think anybody was looking at this through rose-colored glasses, but we thought at the strategic level, there were real opportunities to work together.
President George Bush has called for a new approach.
The two presidents would size each other up. By some in the former communist state of Slovenia.
This is more about the president developing a personal relationship.
Vladimir Putin, as someone who had, I'm sure, a very thick dossier on President Bush, was trying to find his weaknesses